Tien is here to talk about Cima Dome and the fire that was that happened there about almost 3 years ago now. It's in the Joshua Tree Forest in Southern California. And I'm going to let her explain a little bit more about that, but I wanted to be sure and introduce her. She is an award-winning science journalist and filmmaker, and she's done stories on chemistry, climate, culture, and more, and has appeared in outlets including Chemical and Engineering News, Nature, Scientific American, TED, Ed, and Vice News. And she's produced digital explainer videos that have collectively garnered more than 15 million views. She's also produced short documentaries and serves as a series writer-producer for Historian's Take, which is a history and pop culture explainer docuseries for PBS. And she received her PhD in organic chemistry from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and she's currently based in Los Angeles. So with that, I'm going to welcome Tien and allow her to introduce her partner there, and I will get going.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brenda. And thank you very much for having us tonight. We're really thrilled to be able to share our film with the group. And I also want to introduce John Haas. John was the cinematographer for this film, and he's also my partner. So we're zooming in from our living room right now. He's also a documentary filmmaker and cinematographer, and his work revolves around human rights and environmental justice and workers' rights. So I think he'll have a lot to share with us tonight too. Is there anything you want to add?
No, I think that sums me up pretty much.
Great. So I'll tell you a little bit about the film that we'll watch before, and then we'll play the film, and then I'll come back and tell you a bit about how it came about and things that we couldn't include in the film. So basically, this came about at the end of 2021. We got to spend 2 days out in Cima Dome with a team of volunteers led by Drew Kaiser, who is a botanist for the National Park Service. And they were doing a restoration project, planting about 1,000 trees about 14 months after this devastating wildfire that destroyed an estimated 1.3 million Joshua trees. And Cima Dome is the largest Joshua tree forest in the world, I believe. And so we got to meet some incredible people. We had no idea what to expect, but I think you'll be as charmed by everyone as we were.
Joshua trees are just a symbol of what my home looks like. They take hundreds of years to get to the size that they are. Seeing them burnt is beautiful and devastating.
Is currently assisting with evacuation.
I've had to evacuate my crew because the fire got too close before. To get chased out like that is discouraging, extremely discouraging, but that doesn't mean that we're gonna give up.
Thanks for coming out. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be planting Joshua trees within the most badly affected areas of the fire with the hopes that those Joshua trees will grow up, they'll start producing seed, and then they'll start kind of reforesting the Cima Dome naturally. So planning for the restoration started basically while the dome fire was still going on. I was driving around doing a burn severity assessment, just thinking to myself, like, gosh, what do I do? It's one of the densest, largest Joshua tree forests in the world, and I'm just one person. If this place burns again, that's gonna set us back. Red brome is pretty much, I would say, the #1 immediate threat to our project and to the Joshua Tree Forest up here. One of the reasons why the dome fire was so bad, it kind of forms a continuous layer of fuel, which when you get a wildfire, it will carry that fire from one shrub to another. We're planting about 1,000 trees, and then we'll be planting 1,000 more each year for the next 3 years, 4,000 total.
The Joshua tree is an iconic plant, much like the California redwood. The plant has a lot of intrinsic beauty, but it also has a lot of ecological importance. It's associated with a wide diversity of other plant species as well as animal species. My name's Bruce Baldwin, and I'm a professor in the Department of Integrative Biology here at Berkeley. And I also am the curator of the Jepson Herbarium, which is focused on the native flora of California. Desert plants are recognized as being an ecologically extreme habitat, but they can be vulnerable to climate change in the sense that they can often be close to their ecological tolerance limits. Additional climate change in a direction of more extreme heat and drought could potentially be catastrophic for some plants.
This one has a very tough road ahead of it. I think it's our obligation to give them a head start. In 2019, I started working on a petition to the California Fish and Game Commission seeking protection of the western Joshua tree. In 2022, the commission will decide whether the species warrants permanent protection under the law as a threatened species. If it does so, it will be the first species in California protected by law due to the threats of climate change.
Joshua Tree National Park has actually done quite a bit of work for us up here. They were able to get about 90% success rate. We're hoping that the cages can keep jackrabbits and other would-be herbivores out. And so we're hoping for 90%, but anywhere upwards of 50 is actually probably is good.
Oh my gosh, so I have been emailing volunteers for like the last 2 months. And so it is so cool to see everybody here. It's finally all coming to fruition, and it's been really awesome.
The way this crew wound up on this project, originally this crew was an LGBTQ plus forestry crew that was slated to do forestry work out at Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park. Their whole project was to build a fire break out there, and literally the week of their orientation, the park caught fire.
I came out here today to help with the restoration project because this is a really important place to me. I've been camping here for close to 30 years, which is longer than any of the houses I've ever lived in my life. This place is home. Because there's so much energy going into this and so many people from different walks of life coming together to do this, today I'm choosing to feel optimistic. It's about 1.3 million trees lost in the fire.
You can put the plant in there.
So that's 1.3 million minus 1.
Upwards of 90% of Joshua trees can die post-fire. But a small percentage, if the conditions are right, can sprout from the roots of a Joshua tree. And right here in front of us, a tree that appears dead, and most of them around us are dead, but this one is sprouting. This little growth came up since the fire last year. Seeing that gives me hope. It's a reminder that as catastrophic as the impacts on this planet can be and how much we need to protect them, they have their own resiliency and their own determination to survive, and this one's trying to do that.
This might sound melodramatic, but I really just want to be able to look the younger generation in the eyes in 50 years from now and be able to tell them that I tried. Like, I did what I could. I did go out there and plant some trees. I don't know what the future holds in terms of climate change, but I want to be able to honestly tell the younger generation that I tried.
Everyone so far is having a blast. You know, we're having a little setback with the weather here in a few days. Right now it's pretty cold, and then I think we're supposed to get rain all day tomorrow, and then even a little bit of snow. Other than that, everything's great. You know, everyone's spirits are high. My spirit's high, so yeah, we're doing good.
All right, so that is our film. I thought for this next part, and Brenda, let me know if you wanted to jump in and moderate this, or I can just sort of forge on ahead. You know, we sort of left you on a bit of a cliffhanger with that video, and so a few days after we left, they did have to stop because of this freezing weather. But it looks like I did check, and they did resume planting the next spring. So in 2022, they planted in March and then again in November. I haven't checked to see exactly how many of those trees have survived, but that's something I definitely want to follow up with Drew, and I can report back. But I thought, you know, it might be interesting to start and talk about sort of how this project came to us. This is actually something that John's friend, Troy, who is also a science journalist, brought to us. So he had been reporting on Joshua trees and was a lot more familiar with this area of research than we were. And he came across this project, and he was planning to just go as a volunteer. I think I hear a little something in the background. Hello. So he was planning to just join as a volunteer, and he brought us this story about 10 days before the project was starting. And I quickly sort of talked to John and Troy, and we definitely thought there was a story here. And we pitched it to Knowable Magazine, who, if you could see that little K in the corner, that's for Knowable. So Knowable is a wonderful nonprofit science magazine. They do a lot of high quality science journalism. They're published by the annual reviews, and their model is to fund high quality journalism and allow other outlets to republish it for free. So I pitched it to them, and they were excited about the project. Of course, we sent them some beautiful pictures of Joshua trees, and I think that, you know, that speaks to just the love and fascination people have about Joshua trees, and so they were instantly on board. And then we ended up trekking out to Cima Dome, which is about 2.5 hours, 3 hours from where we are in LA. And we really didn't know what to expect. We had talked briefly to Drew, who was in charge of the project. But really all we knew is that their plan was to plant these trees. And really they were testing out 4 different methods of planting. So this is something that we didn't get to really cover too much in the video, but you know, these efforts, there's still a bit of an experiment. So you know, these, as someone said in the video, these plants have a long road ahead of them, and so they wanted to give them the best chance at succeeding as they could, but they also wanted to mitigate how much they put into the environment. So that includes those cages that you saw. So they were testing 4 methods: caged, uncaged, and then by a nurse plant, which is planted sort of by another plant that might be able to shade it, give it a little bit of sort of support, and then planted sort of by itself. So this was the first year that they were doing it. So with each plant that was put into the ground, you would put it into the ground and then sort of tag it and put notes and then tag its location so that they could track its progress. And this is so the team can see what is the least, I forget the word now, but the the least disturbance they can put into the environment to help these plants survive. So yeah, going into it, we just had that, you know, they were doing this sort of this pilot study, it seemed, but when we got out there, you know, we expected the desert, so we expected this really, we expected heat, but it ended up almost, it was like a really cold rain, not quite snow, but extreme weather. So we were there 2 days, and one day it was like really cold and rainy, and the second day it was absolutely gorgeous, sunny. And everyone that we met, they sort of said, yeah, like this is to be expected. It's just temperatures can change just on a dime out there. But personally, I was really struck by everyone that we met. It clearly meant a lot to them to be involved in this effort. And people told us about how it felt to really, you know, put their hands in the ground and do what they could, even though it's really a long road, as a lot of people said. Someone that I wanted to bring up was Brie Montoro, who she was, they were the voice that you heard at the very beginning, and they were in charge of the crew that got displaced by another fire. And something that we didn't get to include in the video was that planting trees was one of the first projects they ever worked on. And that first project, I believe only about 1% of the trees survived. So I think it's incredible that they are still out there, you know, refusing to give up. I'm really curious how the trees are faring now. But in terms of the actual project, we were only there for 2 days, but it went on for about 10 days, and they got about 120 volunteers around the area. Something Drew told us was that, you know, as the wildfire was happening, people were emailing him asking, how can I help? How can I get involved? So this is a really engaged community that cares, you know, about where they live. And then I was going to move into, I actually wanted to share a story that he told us about how many people came from all over. So he had volunteers from Wisconsin, Colorado, Norway. There was one family that came and they brought, they had named their son Joshua for the trees. And something that sort of spontaneously happened when the volunteers were there is that they were putting in information about the trees, you know, for the GPS, for the logging, and they started naming the trees. And that's just something that happened, you know, organically. People were naming it for like sort of pet names or after their pets. But let me stop here and let's see if John wants to add anything, but then I was going to go into the science that we couldn't include.
Oh, just, you know, Troy, who is also a science journalist, who brought us onto this project. He lives out in Yucca Valley, so he's surrounded by Joshua trees. And actually, I had in late 2018, Troy and I on another project drove through Cima Dome, and it was just such an awe-inspiring sight. And yeah, not being a I'm from the Midwest, so I wasn't very knowledgeable about the desert. So I was shocked that there were forests of these Joshua trees. But then the memory of that also, when I returned in 2021, late 2021, it was just shocking to see the devastation, the way the trees look, kind of like skeletons with the white bark. Once the bark peels away, the interior is very, very white. And yeah, it was just kind of, it's not a moment I'm going to forget. But.
Yeah, it was a really surreal feeling because the trees were all dead, but they still looked beautiful. Like they were such a stunning sight. And I also wanted to share some of the, you know, this piece was really about volunteers and their efforts. But there was a lot of science about the Joshua trees that we could squeeze into the video, and that I thought might be interesting to the group. But so when we went up to talk to Bruce Baldwin, he's an author who has published in annual reviews. And so the thing with Knowable is that with every story, they have just a wide, such a huge library of journals, of review journals. And so they just asked that one of their authors is featured in every piece. And we were able to talk to Bruce about the flora and fauna in California. And he let us know that sort of how to distinguish between Western and Eastern Joshua trees. I think something that was really interesting to learn from him is that, only in the last couple of decades, scientists realized that the two species of trees are actually pollinated by two distinct species of moths. So for the longest time, they thought it was a single moth species that pollinated both trees, but it turns out that the specific species actually correlates with the size of the trees. So the longer-leafed Western Joshua tree is pollinated by a sort of a longer moth than the shorter-leafed Eastern Joshua trees. And so I think that was really fascinating, because these trees have such a old, long evolutionary history, and scientists think that they co-evolved with these moths. And what's unique about them too is that the moths have this relationship where they lay eggs in the Joshua tree plant, and then the caterpillar, when they hatch, they actually eat some of it, but then they also spread it as well. So it's a unique relationship that they've evolved to have. And I think how this ties into their survival, I was sort of refreshing my memory about the Joshua trees today. And, as someone mentioned in the video, these trees are struggling to withstand drought. So they can't really handle these prolonged droughts, these warmer temperatures. But Joshua trees are really old. So for them to be able to migrate migrate north, essentially, to cooler temperatures, it's unclear if they'll be able to do so. So there's some climate models that say that as much as 90% of Joshua trees may be gone by the end of the century. And that also has to do with the fact that Joshua trees take 20 years to reach maturity. So a Joshua tree forest like at Cima Dome, with all of those mature trees, it's going to take a long time you can't just sort of replace that overnight. And in fact, the seedlings that they were planting were 3 years old, like the small ones that you saw. They happened to be cultivating them for a different research project. So they were able to take those seedlings and put them into the ground. Otherwise, they wouldn't have, it'd be a lot harder if they didn't already have those ready to go. But yes, so it takes 20 years for Joshua trees to come to maturity. And then they often don't spread further than 100 meters from their parent tree. So we're looking at a rate of about 100 meters of movement every 20 years, which is, it's tough. It's tough to hear. It's tough to think about for the Joshua tree, but Joshua trees are also a keystone species. So a lot of other, organisms like insects, lizards, birds, they all rely on it for habitat. So as a keystone species, everything is connected. So it's posing a lot of challenges for that environment. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about, what's being done to try to protect them. We featured Brendan Cummings, who was amazing, and he has been filing a lot of these petitions to protect endangered species. And he's filed one for the Western Joshua tree, I believe both species were considered, but only the western tree was temporarily protected. We actually just got an email from Troy a couple weeks ago saying that basically they were going to make a decision on whether or not to make that protection by this California Endangered Species Act. I might have gotten the naming wrong, but it's something that would have permanently protected the trees. But they decided not to make a decision because there's a new bill that's been proposed by Governor Gavin Newsom here in California. And so it's proposed to protect the trees. So they've sort of pushed off the decision to see how that bill will go and if it gets passed. But it's been waiting for some time now. That potentially could help. That would put greater protection in place. But, you know, Joshua trees are not only something that we didn't touch on at all in the video. Is we talked about the threats from climate change, but there's a lot of other man-made threats, including development. So places like Joshua Tree, where Troy lives, you know, is a very popular vacation destination now. And people really like to clear the trees to make room for new Airbnbs. And I don't know, maybe you can, if you remember, I'm trying to remember what he's told us about, you know, the way that things are enforced. It's actually not that difficult to be able to cut down a Joshua tree. So I think that, I think there's some interesting things in that area that I would love to also explore, you know, if we had the time, because I think, you know, there's stuff going on with the development, but I believe that Joshua trees are also in danger because they occupy certain areas that that developers would like to use for clean energy, which is kind of it's a trade-off, and I think that it's a topic that's worth exploring. But that's a bit of a tangent. I think I've talked for a while now, so I would love to actually, you know, hear what you're interested in. You know, if we can also talk about the filmmaking process or other things that, you know, you still had questions about. But yeah, I think I'll stop there and I'll let it open up to everyone.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. This is Brenda. I know we've done some reforestation projects as Friends of Gold Butte out in the monument. It's been several years ago, but I remember distinctly that the crew that we were working with at the time, and I know Jim Boone can speak to this too, but they were talking about something like a 5 to 10% possible success rate, which sounds much more terrible than, you know, this one was talking about, you know, a possible 90%, but anything over 50 they would consider good. But to even think about only having a 5% success rate is pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah, I had the same reaction sort of when Bree was telling us that her first project had like a 1% success rate. And that we did talk to Drew about, you know, what he thought about the success, and he was basing that off of like smaller studies he'd done with Joshua Tree National Park, and I believe that was like pretty controlled. So it's yeah, what the real number is, I think if I had planned better, I would have tried to reach out to Drew before this call. How the fire started. Oh.
Yeah, I was saying, did you see that one in the chat? How did the fire start?
I actually don't recall. Do you?
I believe, I mean, the red brome was introduced at least 200 plus years ago. It's, I believe, a species from the Mediterranean originally. So it's an invasive, non-native species. I believe a lightning strike was the cause. We'd have to fact check that, but I remember them talking about that, and then it just spread uncontrollably due to the dryness of the region. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds familiar. And also, yeah, that red brome, which Drew described to us, is basically as fuel. It basically like coats the whole forest floor with you know, a very flammable material, so it can sort of jump from tree to tree. And I think that maybe you can, if you recall this, I believe that the reason why the fire didn't get put out immediately too is that there were multiple fires going on in California at the time. And so the sort of resources were spread thin at the time. I see the explaining the difference between the east and west Joshua trees. Yes. So I couldn't say geographically. I just looked into it in terms of sort of the two species. So they are, I mean, one is sort of, one has longer leaves and the other has shorter leaves and is a bit shorter. So the western Joshua tree, that's Yucca brevifolia. And then the eastern Joshua tree is Yucca, and I don't know how to pronounce this, but Jaegeriana. But yes, and also I would love to know why the eastern Joshua tree didn't get protected, but that's something also to ask Drew.
Oh, is that the result of the one gentleman that said it was up for protection in 2022? It was not protected?
Actually, it was the western tree was up for protection. I believe that the last time we talked to Brendan, he had also filed a petition for the eastern tree, but I haven't, just from a quick news search, it doesn't seem like anything has been happening with the eastern tree.
I have a question. Hi. This is Doreen. Is Drew there with you? Is Drew there?
No, Drew is not.
He did the research
He did.
in Cima Dome area. Okay.
Exactly. Yes.
All
He
right.
was the main character of the video. He was the botanist for the National Park Service, leading the effort.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Will the video be available on this website?
Yes, we can share it in the chat.
Yeah, it's also been released on YouTube, so we can
On YouTube.
we can
very well. Yes.
Oh, yeah,
Thank
we
you.
can share that link in the chat in a bit.
I appreciate that.
Mhm.
I appreciate, thank you for what you do, because I've been, Joshua trees have been my friend. I've, grown up in Joshua trees, and I always thought that there's a slight difference. These look a little different, but of course, I live for them. I hope that they're surviving and doing well. Makes me want to go by Cima Dome road again. I've been watching the Cima Dome. Its shape has changed over the 40 years. I've been driving back and forth to California and from Nevada. And it used to be a perfect symmetrical curve, but it's all changed now. So it looks very different. And of course, I wish I would have taken time-lapse photos. It's quite extraordinary. And thank you for what you do. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So there's a question about our favorite part of making the film. There's a lot. I mean, it was 2 days, but it was such a packed and unexpected, unpredictable 2 days of literally arriving in Cima Dome and filming within minutes. I don't know. I think both of us were just so surprised and impressed and just had such an amazing time with all the volunteers. They were just such an eclectic crew out there. Even the folks that brought the camels,
Yeah.
that was very unexpected. And yeah, I would say, I don't know. I mean, definitely the story. I mean, it's easy to get beautiful shots out in that landscape because it's so stunning. It's just a stunning area. But I think the folks that volunteer, that even with those low success rates, are out there because they have that hope that they can save this tree, are, yeah, I think they're the heart of the story. But,
yeah. And it's funny you say about the camels, because when we first got there, we were supposed to immediately go out and start planting, but the camel wasn't cooperating for like an hour and a half, and so eventually they just had to abandon. Someone had camels and they really wanted to help out with the effort, and they brought the camels, and they thought that the camels could be like pack animals and bring the plants out, but it wasn't as easy as that. But we appreciate the thought. Yeah, I think my favorite part for me, it was, even though I'd been making science explainer videos for a few years at that point, I'd been mostly making videos where I would do Zoom calls with researchers, or I would use footage that researchers gave me. And so this was my first time getting to go into the fields and sort of reacting and just sort of thinking on my feet with the team. Things change so quickly, and there's certain things you need to get, but then also you want to capture the spirit of the people you actually meet. And so it's so much constant problem solving. And I think that ultimately, after we edited the video and after everything was done, that's when it really hit me how incredible it was what they were doing, because they were so having to put together the story of all the things that are stacked up against Joshua trees, the fact that they are out there putting in the work. And also just, it was amazing to see that lifestyle, because so often, we're not always in the field. A lot of the time we do a lot of computer work, a lot of editing, a lot of writing. And so to meet people who are, out in nature every day, it was just, I felt, honored to be able to meet them and see a different way of daily life.
There we go. Yes, thank you. What percentage of the monument was able to be replanted by a group of wonderful volunteers?
So when we were there about halfway through the trip, and they were about halfway through their 1,000 trees that they were going to plant. But ultimately, they're going to plant 1,000 trees every year for the next 4 years. So 4,000 total. So I think, just thinking about that statistically, they're planting 4,000 trees, but more than 1 million were burned. And I think that comes back to, you just have to believe that it's better to do something than nothing, I think.
Yeah, I felt a bit heartbroken when I heard the news about the freeze after, I think the day after we left, they halted planting. And when a freeze comes through, when the plants are so juvenile, it can be devastating. That's why you get those 1% or maybe luckily 5% success rates. It's just and that's something I'm not clear on, if that's a traditional weather pattern of the area, or if that's like what we're experiencing now in LA. We had snow in LA today, which is kind of crazy. So yeah, clearly something's going on with the weather.
So I was going to say, I've driven, there's a nice Joshua Tree forest just south of Rachel, Nevada, a little north of here. And according to the sign that's posted there, it's, I think, the only place where both the eastern and western Joshua trees meet and are growing in the same sort of region together there. And it's a really pretty spot when you get up south of there, coming up just to a pass, and it's just a really dense forest in there. So it's an interesting little piece.
Oh, cool. Thanks for sharing that.
You know, one other thing I don't think we mentioned about the moths that pollinate, and I think to me this metaphorically draws a parallel to the efforts, is that they're very small. They're incredibly small moths and cannot fly very far. So when there's a fire that knocks out a bunch of the trees, when they leave the plant to find the next plant, they just don't have the strength to get to it. And that's why it's devastating when developers are removing trees, they're limiting the amount that they can pollinate, that these moths can reach. So yeah, I don't know. Something about that imagery of the poor moth not able to find its next tree, kind of Troy planted that, or other producer planted that in my head, and it's stuck in there.
Yeah, John wanted to include like whole animated section about the moths, and I'm like, we don't have the budget for that.
Someone has said the eastern species has a better shot at migration to evade climate change compared to the western species because of less development. I just know that it's a huge undertaking to try and reestablish those trees in such a large area. And if truly 1.3 million trees are gone, then 1,000 a year, you know, how many years is that going to take to even attempt it? So bravo to those who have started the project, and they can certainly use all the help they can get.
Well, when we do reach out to Drew about those questions, we'll be sure to let him know that that y'all were interested and that we were able to share his project with more people.
Yeah, that was great to know that. And you know, we've had fires here in Gold Butte as well, and it's taken a lot longer than just a couple of years to even make any attempts at reforestation. So it's definitely a devastating event when it happens wherever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Good that you've put this out there. You know, the more people know about it, the more, you know, more that can be done.
Hope so. Yeah, and I also got the sense from them that they sort of expected that it's going to burn again. I mean, I think a lot of these places sort of braced for more climate disasters, unfortunately, to come.
Unfortunately, fire is a natural thing. It does happen. Lightning strikes, like you said, or, you know, human mismanagement or whatever. They do happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that yeah, the lightning strike was the natural part, and then the red brome, sort of it being an invasive species, that sort of made the fire so much worse than it would have been.
Well, sadly, we might have to change the names of Joshua Tree National Park and Glacier National Park by the end of the century. That's probably truer than we'd like it to be.
Yeah. No, we appreciate you all watching our film and the conservation efforts. I'm sure a lot of you are involved with. Like I said, it was eye-opening being out there and just having had that glimpse of Cima Dome before the fire and then after. It's just something that always stick with me and help me realize the importance of, yeah, just mitigating climate change. And yeah, it was one of my first forays into science videos, Tien's background, but I'm more on social justice stories. But yeah, it really opened my eyes to the efforts that these scientists are doing, these biologists and volunteers. So